School choice. The state ed board gets its hand slapped. Unintended, intended, or simply inevitable, the Democratic nominee and change at the Namesake Foundation. The recovery, provided you feel it, what's the Arkansas Index? And in business, a very nice quarter for one retailer and a big bet on Jet. Arkansas Week next.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.
This is Arkansas Week.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Arkansas Week. Public schools, charter schools, and the courts, and we'll work in a little politics of a different sort in the next half hour. Jacob Kaufman joins us from KUAR Public Radio in Central Arkansas. Wesley Brown, reporter, columnist, editor at Arkansas Business. Ernie Dumas, an independent journalist, columnist for Arkansas Times. Jacob, we had some news, more news. It just keeps coming from the State Education Board. But it also came this week from the United States Court of Appeals from the 8th Circuit.
This was all about the issue of school choice, and that's one of the big pillars of the education reform movement, in addition to charter schools and things like that. And school choice is the idea that you reside in a given district, a given school district, but for whatever reason you want to go to a nearby, perhaps an adjacent school district. And so there's been a law in Arkansas since 1992 that was changed recently that allowed transfers between districts but had racial considerations in mind, not wanting, for instance, parents in a majority black district who had a white kid to send them to a majority white district. So a 2013 school choice law got rid of that racial component so that people could just transfer between districts without factoring in whether it's going to make one district more or less segregated than it was before. So the decision we had in the 8th Circuit Court was pertaining to some Garland County schools who had previously been under a federal desegregation order. And the big takeaway from this is that if your district was under a federal desegregation order, then the 1992 law applies, which is to say that there are racial factors to consider. So it's a bit of a blow to school choice advocates who wanted more unfettered ability to transfer between districts.
Yeah, and I think it affects about five districts, the 1992 law that have to rely on the 1992 law. I think as you said, the issue was that parents were taking their kids out of the urban in those communities, out of the urban school or usually the bigger schools, and transfer them to smaller suburban schools where there was less minorities or in some cases all white school districts.
Well, that's the history of this whole thing, and it's really basically what it's all about, although no one will acknowledge it. It's all about transferring, if you're a white parent and your child out of a school that's usually predominantly African American, and moving them into a district that's more white than African American. And it goes way back, but the law was been pretty clear all along. What the 8th Circuit ruled was no surprise, could not be any surprise to anybody, because federal law preempts state law. Mm-hmm. The legislature can pass all kind of acts, and if it violates whether it's a federal rule, a federal court decision, an act of Congress, whatever, it's invalid. Mm-hmm. And that was clearly the case here, and that's what the very conservative 8th Circuit Court of Appeals, one of the most conservative appellate courts in the land, just said simply no. There is there's a settlement in which you agreed not to do this, and you can't do it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the same thing. There's going to be a lawsuit. I think was it filed this week at El Dorado,
Union County. Yeah.
In Union County, my old county, in my home school district, when way back yonder, before actually before the Brown decision. And there, parents want to move their kids out of the predominantly African-American El Dorado school districts over to Parker's Chapel, little school district just outside town that is nearly all white. very good school district, by the way. And so that's, I suspect, the court's going to rule the same way there, and also at Jacksonville, I guess, and you've got the same issues here. So the State Board of Education had simply ignored that, although some members of the board protested, we really can't do this. But the State Board of Education said, no, we're going to do that. And so they're being overturned, and I think they'll be overturned in these other cases as well.
Yeah, Chuck.
While this is up to the courts clearly to resolve in the end, it's important to note that the political will in Arkansas is behind unfettered school choice access, primarily from the Republican Party, but also some Democrats as well.
Clouding this to some extent is the some would argue a proliferation of charters. And this makes affecting desegregation more difficult. And the most common argument, of course, is that it undercuts conventional public schools. And the state board continues to, it's always balancing or considering at least 2 charter apps.
The legal issue is not quite as clear because they're staying in the same school districts, funded by the, they're still in the Little Rock School District where all these charter schools are being approved and then expanded. But ultimately there's a lawsuit on that as well. John Walker has filed a suit. So we'll see whether that stands up or not, but that's a more difficult issue for the courts.
Yeah, and I think some of the school districts are simply asking the state to kind of slow the train down in terms of the charter schools. Let's have a pause. Let's see how it's affecting these districts, but that doesn't seem to be the will of the State Department of Education and the Hutchinson administration. They want to move ahead, and that's what the State Board of Education is doing. There, every few months, you get a few more charter schools that are either given an okay to go ahead and begin enrolling students or expanding.
Yeah.
Or else moving to another part of the city, like in Little Rock. There's a charter school that's started off in a more mixed part of the city, predominated by African Americans, and they want to move it out west, which is into a kind of a white preserve, as we used to call it. So, and they approved that move. So, of course, opponents are saying, well, it's all about race and discouraging the enrollment of African American students in this charter school. So,
and to be even
debate's going to go on.
To be even headed, the board has rejected some apps, but the trend line seems to be up.
Well, and advocates clearly, they're not saying publicly at least that their intent is they want to be in a segregated school. Their argument is that it's all about the individual family's liberty to send their kid wherever they want to have them educated. That's their mindset going into it.
Okay, let's move on. There was the and we're going to touch on presidential politics more than touch on it, but there are some pronounced Arkansas aspects to it this time. And let's begin with a breaker, which is that a major announcement by former President Clinton, who, as we tape this broadcast, observes his 70th birthday. On the evening before, he made it clear, if he can make it clear, that there are going to be some significant changes at the family's namesake foundation in the event Mrs. Clinton prevails in November. And this could have a significant impact on, obviously, on operations of the foundation, reaching all the way down to Little Rock.
Well, of course, the nexus between Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton's political ambitions and the operation of the foundation has been an issue for some time, and it has been increasingly so in this campaign, and been a lot of criticism recently about all the foreign money from whether they're from Saudis or Eastern
Nigeria.
Europe or wherever, Nigeria, all these places, from rich people, from leaders of government contributing to the Clinton Foundation, which everybody acknowledges has done great work in Africa and South America and other places, and even here in the United States. But that there's some kind of quid pro quo involved, that when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she perhaps did some favors for some of these foreign governments in exchange for grants, gifts to the Clinton Foundation. So there's been a lot of criticism of that, and that's part of Hillary Clinton's image problems and suggestions that she is devious and dishonest. So I think this is to, and there's been some more in the last week or two. So I think this is an effort to try to push those issues to the back and say, we're not going to take any, and start, if she wins the presidency, we're not going to take any more money for the Clinton Foundation from abroad. And that's a huge source of their revenue, which will mean that they will have to kind of cut back staff, operations, and all kinds of things if she gets elected president. So that's what they announced, that come January 20th, they will no longer accept, if she's president, no longer accept gifts from outside the United States.
Yeah, and I guess, yeah.
See, November the whatever through January 20th, it's all bets.
Yeah, and the Trump campaign has obviously come out and said, well, this is about time that you've done this, or it's too late. And as Ernie said, the quid pro quo effect is one that I think is a legitimate concern or a legitimate debate that we should have on that issue, and I think we'll see a little bit more about that in the coming days.
I think somebody had suggested, some paper up east suggested that demanded that they just should never accept anything from a foreign government. Well, I mean, all this work wouldn't be done with that, without that. So anyway, it's going to be an issue, regardless of the effort by the president and Hillary Clinton to kind of shove it aside as an issue, but it will continue to be an issue through the year.
Jacob?
Of course, Hillary Clinton's having access to people because of receiving money or speeches is something that Bernie Sanders also brought up, particularly with Goldman Sachs speeches. Kind of a similar dynamic. They're not pointing to something that she got in return necessarily, but she had access or talked to leaders when she might otherwise would not have. Of course, the irony from the Trump campaign calling for transparency is that he won't release his tax returns, basic things like that. His former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, of course, is tied up with pro-Russian Ukrainian money. So there's
and resigned this morning.
Resigned on Friday morning.
Resigned Friday morning. So to try to put that issue aside. Obviously, Paul Manafort had become a huge problem for Donald Trump, and so they severed that thing entirely today.
Well, this was off the books money, supposedly, that Mr. Manafort was receiving as well. So every time there seems to be an issue that might otherwise just grant the Trump campaign enormous traction, there's a counterweight in the form of the Russian stuff.
Yeah, we saw it in the previous week when it seems like Trump can look to gain some momentum on an issue, or and then something happens. This Manafort issue, as Ernie noted, it may have some criminal elements to it, and he may have broken the law in his ties to pro-Russian groups, and that could be an issue that follows Trump campaign well into the until election day, and where you have, and it happens in a week when Hillary makes this announcement that, and they could have taken that whole issue and say, well, and use it as an attack mode to go against the Clinton campaign, but right now they're answering questions about this issue.
And here's Donald Trump out there talking about praising Vladimir Putin, and saying, wouldn't it be great to have great relations with Russia, and talking about, well, he might not enforce their obligations under the NATO treaty to defend the Baltic states if they're invaded by Russia. So it's all been a bizarre spring.
And one of the selling points for Trump from cautious Republicans who were a little bit wary to endorse him was that when he got in the White House, he would surround himself with good people. And this is a big slap against that argument. I would think that he's capable of having a good staff around him. He picked one of his most senior advisors, and this is a scandal for a senior advisor like we haven't had for a presidential candidate.
Well, speaking of November, Mr. Silver of 538, whose projections have been pretty shrewd in years past, as of Friday morning has Mrs. Clinton, the Democratic nominee, at about 360 electoral votes. I make that about 270. That's about 90, I think, more than she needs, and actually that's down a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're estimating she has about an 83% chance of winning.
Somewhere in that.
It varies each day according to the polls.
Yeah, it kind of floats a little bit. But there's also this, I noticed. Nobody believes that Mrs. Clinton has much of a chance of carrying the state where she resided for 20 years and was First Lady. But I note that her odds of carrying Arkansas have now doubled under the now.
Still not
it's all
significant.
it's all the way up to about 10 or 11% chance of carrying Arkansas.
I think
the
that's-
fact of the matter, what's interesting there is that is about 3 times more than she had just a month ago, which I would suggest is reflective of what's happening elsewhere across the country. I mean, Georgia, she's given a chance of, an honest chance of carrying Georgia. Gaining in South Carolina.
Southern states. Yeah, and it's all because of Trump's foibles. I mean, he continues to. From any perspective, the last 3 weeks have just been terrible. I mean, it's decimated his campaign, and I think it's taken away a little bit of any kind of momentum that he has in when you look at the traditional Republicans, some of the Republicans, that's where you're starting to see people are reluctant to say we're back, and then they're reluctant to even talk about it, and have basically said, we're looking toward past the election and looking to say, well, what can we do to hold up, as you said, the down ballot, the people on the down ballot? How can we make sure that the Democrats don't win the House or gain some traction in the Senate? So.
Well, funny, there's the segue. Some Republican friends in the General Assembly that I spoke with last night, some of whom I had spoken with on background before the Republican convention, as a matter of fact, back into the spring. And they were echoing last night to me what we told you this was going to happen. I mean, this is their worst fear, and it can be summarized again. I think this is from 538 on Friday morning, and let me quote, Democrats now lead in enough states to take back the Senate, provided Mrs. Clinton maintains her large lead. That was the Arkansas Republicans' fear, at least some of them anyway, the ones that I spoke with, about Mr. Trump's prospects. They were already in late spring conceding the White House, and their concern was the Senate and, of course, then the Supreme Court.
I heard Senator Tom Cotton give some remarks in Little Rock to the Political Animals Club a week or two after the Republican National Convention, and one thing he said I think kind of alludes to that. He said, it's one thing to unify your party, and maybe they did that in Cleveland, but unifying your party is not enough. You have to reach beyond your party to win a general election. So I guess that's where we stand on that.
Well, Hillary, the Clinton campaign opened a Little Rock office, an Arkansas office, yesterday or the day before, out at on the backside of the Tanglewood Shopping Center. And I would suggest that maybe that they think they've got a chance in Arkansas. Obviously they don't, but I suppose it felt like this is her state. They'll have no chance of winning here, but we need to at least show
fly
the
the
colors,
flag,
fly the flag and open an office. But nobody, I think, gives her any chance of getting even 40% of the vote, maybe 40%, 42%. I think Barack Obama got 37% one of his 2 elections in Arkansas, and she should do better than that. And I doubt if she does much more than that, and certainly it's doubtful that they can carry a Senate race in Arkansas.
Well, in another aggregation of polls, though, this morning, this is part of Mr. Trump's problem, as I suspect reflected in states such as Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana. She's up, and it's the decline in white working class men.
Yeah, and
support for Trump.
Yeah, and that's been his big sweet spot. That's been the point where he was going to carry that demographic, and that was his strength. And when you start to see that part of his strength erode, then that's why you're starting to see people flee from this campaign. And even just the ideal of him losing, or even losing some of the southern states, was we weren't even talking about that. And now here we are. Even though he's not going to, Hillary's not going to win Arkansas, but we're talking about her increasingly getting more support here, opening an office here, and looking forward to a better numbers here in Arkansas.
Speaking of numbers in Arkansas, 3.9, it held steady last month.
Yeah, our Unemployment rate is still under 4%, which is historic. But we're starting to see, I think we're starting to see some stabilization we've seen some strong growth, over almost 60,000 jobs added in the last year. And we're starting to see that. I think we've reached our peak, and now we're going to see that level off and it go down a little bit. We're going back to school where you usually see some numbers come up, and we may see that number come back down slightly, but going into the rest of the year, I think we'll ease back up over 4%, and but still, as Ernie had noted, the Hutchinson people are saying we're in a great position. We're adding jobs to the economy. The economy is growing, so and I don't think anything is going to change over the next several months on that front.
If it creeps back up, the jobless rate in Arkansas, Wesley, will that, to what extent, if any, will that be because people choosing to re-enter the workforce who had previously left?
That's the one question that a lot of people are asking. That there are people who left the workforce, older people who are not finding jobs, and they've just given up. And those numbers are not accounted for in the unemployment number. And I still think that's an issue. There's still high unemployment among youth and minority categories, black men more specifically. So those are some areas where there's still some troubling numbers. But if those numbers go back up, it's going to be especially in the manufacturing sector. The manufacturing sector is in a downturn. Our farming numbers are not that good, and those numbers are not counted in the unemployment numbers. So there's still a lot of areas for improvement in our numbers.
Quickly, all this water, any impact on ag?
Yeah,
near term?
yeah. You're starting to see some effect on rice and specifically the row crops. It affects their planting season and growing season. So yeah, it's going to have a broad effect on that, and we'll start maybe see those in the employment and unemployment numbers.
Okay, we'll continue to watch that. Now, on the retail, the Arkansas giant behemoth.
Walmart just reported its earnings, and it was a big surprise. As we speak now, this Friday, Wall Street is cheering Walmart, saying they had some great numbers. Their profits were up 8.6%, and which was great because they were predicting that it would not rise that much. But in contrast to others like Target was down 10%. That's where you see the big contrast, and it was a pretty strong quarter and unexpected, very unexpected.
Can Walmart sustain any big box retailer? Can that be, or any retailer period on site retail? Can that be sustained?
I don't think everything's migrating to online, and Walmart did make a big purchase of Jet.com for $3.3 billion to try to catch up with retailers like eBay, Amazon. That's where the growth is. I don't think you're going to see much growth in the big box area. For Walmart to continue to grow, you're going to have to see its online position improve, and they've been pretty bad at that for years.
Yeah. Right.
But they will catch up. Walmart will catch up. That's where the money is. They will catch up.
Oh yeah. They're pouring money into online, and you'll see some improvement in that. But they do have a real competitor in Amazon.com now.
Well, you're seeing this I would think in several other industries that are shedding physical locations. For example, banks. It's not just low interest rates that are hurt. Well, that's certainly an aggravating factor. But you got one bank after another shuttering locations.
Yeah, and it's because of the online effect, and it's affecting business all across. Even you mentioned the retailers, Macy's, Dillard's, and some of the other retailers were down because of they lost money in their online business, and then they're starting to put more, as Ernie noted, more money into these types of businesses, and seeing because people, there are people I know who do all their shopping from their den or the bedroom in their house, and get it delivered by UPS or someone to their.
And it's affecting government revenues as well dramatically for the last, and it keeps shrinking government revenues. because they don't pay any sales taxes on those online purchases typically.
Right, and there's nothing. And Walmart has to do a better job in that area. They've I think with this purchase of Jet.com, they get the guy Mark Lohr, who's the CEO of Jet.com. He'll probably eventually become Walmart's chief marketing officer once he takes that job out. He's a former Amazon executive, and he sold several online businesses for billions. So I think once they get him on board, you'll start to see some good strategies for them to grow and compete with Amazon.com.
All right, got to end it there because we're out of time. Guys, thanks to you for coming in. As always, thanks to you for watching. See you next week.
Arkansas Week is made possible in part by the Arkansas Times, keeping you informed by covering people, events, and politics in Arkansas. By FM 89, KUAR in Little Rock, with in-depth news reporting, analysis, and discussion each weekday.